Well, it is time a microscope was put over the behaviour of state governments. In New South Wales, Dominic Perrottet made a great start, articulating Liberal values of freedom, lower taxes, eliminating waste, etc. But sadly, in a government dominated by the lefties, it's been downhill ever since. So we had a budget a couple of weeks ago. The thorough and relentless One Nation leader Mark Latham delivered an outstanding speech on the budget, or as it's called, the appropriation bill, which deserves infinitely more coverage than it received, because this affects every citizen of New South Wales who's swimming in government debt, state debt piled on federal debt. But Mark Latham's opening remarks in his speech to the budget are arresting when he said this, quote, "How many times in the history of parliamentary democracy has the government broken its own fiscal laws? For this government, it's not once, not twice, but three times, 2019-20, 2021 and now 2021-22. Argued Mark Latham, quote, "Its Fiscal Responsibility Act, passed in 2012, was a no-excuse piece of legislation. No matter the floods, bushfires or viruses, Mike Baird gave a guarantee of annual outlays below long-term average expenses growth. He defined fiscal responsibility around that key test. It was not just a test, but as Mark Latham said, law, L-A-W, law." Argued Mark Latham, a government that can no longer manage its budget according to its own laws is a government which has lost legitimacy. He said, given the Treasurer's pre-election $27 billion spending spree, a fourth breach seems certain. Thank goodness Mark Latham's applying proper scrutiny to what I said at the time was a budget speech to the Parliament that bore a striking resemblance to a grade 11 school essay. Mark joins us. Mark, thank you for your time. Where are we though, Mark, in proper analysis when everywhere we read in the last week we were told that the Barilaro affair took attention away from this excellent state budget? Who is deceiving whom?
Well, I don't know who's saying it's excellent. The past financial year had a spending increase of 26.5%, Alan. And you look through the pages of Australian political and budgetary history, the only comparable level of extravagance that I can find was the Whitlam government's budget in 1974. And no one thought, a budget effectively authored by Jim Cairns at the time, that their spending increase of 24.5% would ever be exceeded. But it has been by Matt Keane, supposedly part of a Liberal National Party government, 26.5% increase. So that breach of the law that you mentioned under the Fiscal Responsibility Act, they're not even getting close, Alan. You know, they're not within a bull's roar of meeting the cap on expenditure increases because the long-term revenue increase in New South Wales is about 6%. So they're 20% over. And Keane's extravagance running into the next election, of course, means there'll be a fourth breach in a row. And I think this is a major problem for the Liberal Party. People don't recognise them anymore. The Howard Costello legacy of surplus budgets paying down debt has been lost. And people sort of say, well, if you want a 26% spending increase and $182 billion gross debt in New South Wales, not even Labor could spend that much. No. So they don't recognise the Liberal Party anymore. And I think this is a big reason why the Morrison government lost. And I think the Perrottet government is headed towards defeat. Yeah.